Volume 14. We're learning Hilchot Brachot. Been discussing a little bit the last few weeks the laws of Birkat Hamazon, which is the brachot we say after the meal. We're now going back to the brachot that we say before the meal. So we've discussed Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz. We discussed once as well the other brachot a person may say, even if you have a bracha of Hamotzi, where you would say if you have fruit, etc., we would still say Brei Praetz. So now we're going to look today a little bit more at the halachot of the brachot of Brei Pri Adama and Brei Praetz, meaning bread, no bread, whatever it is. But before a person eats, we know there are different brachot which Chazal instituted before we have our food. And the rule is that different foods have more specific types of brachot. As we go through, we have 6 different brachot which we could potentially say before eating food or drink. The more specific a bracha can be, the better. Even though, if you were to say a more general bracha, you say a more inclusive bracha over a food, which actually requires a more particular bracha, at least for the Eved, you would have fulfilled your obligation and would not have to go back. This is going to be an important principle when it comes to different sveikot and doubts and maklakot, where we're not sure what the bracha is over specific food. So, for example, if it happened that a person said shehakol, the bracha shehakol, which literally means everying, shehakol miyabid varo, whatever your man used to say, but that would, at least for the Eved, work for anything, because any food that you eat is included under the bracha of shehakol. However, if it's fruits of the tree, fruits of the ground, etc., then it has its own specific bracha, and it's more appropriate to say that bracha. There's also an order of brachot in which one is required if one has different foods together at a meal. Now, this is the way once upon a time they would test people. They would test a young yeshiva bach or a rav, whatever, to see if it's a Talmid Chacham or not. They put all the food out in front of them on the table and see, do you take the right food? Do you say the right bracha? Right? It's not so simple to get all the brachot right. You need a lot of knowledge, more than a few Tzurba Rabbanan Shirim. So the way we remember, first of all, in terms of the order of the brachot to get it right, there's a mnemonic mimaga esh, right, which is literally from the touch of the fire. But those words mimaga esh stand for the first letter of each one is the different brachot we have. So there is mem is hamotzi, which is the first one you would say, which is all encompassing, right? After that, mem also is mizonot. After that is gimel, which is brei pri gefen. Right? Ayin is eitz, brei pri eitz. Aleph is brei pri hadama, and shin is shakol. That is the order of the brachot. If one wouldn't say all 6 in one go, but if one has the different foods, that is the order that it would go. The obvious exception to that bracha, to that rule is on Shabbat, when we make kiddush and we say brei pri gefen first. Even though, right, mimagaesh, that's actually the third one. If you have mezonot or you have hamotzi, that should come first, before that gefen. And that is why we cover up the bread. One of the reasons, right, everybody knows, you cover up the bread, the challah, on Friday night and on Shabbat morning, so that it doesn't get embarrassed. What does it mean the bread doesn't get embarrassed? Obviously, the bread doesn't actually get embarrassed. There's the famous story of the person who's there, comes to the table, and he wants to make kiddush, and he starts shouting at his wife, "Why didn't you cover the bread?" And the person says, "Why do you cover the bread? So the bread doesn't get embarrassed. So the bread can't get embarrassed, but your wife can get embarrassed." Right? That's obviously not the point, and that's not the way it's meant to be. But what do we mean when we say the bread can get embarrassed? It means that it's proper and it's fitting to say the bracha first on hamotzi before you say the bracha on hagefen, because we have an exception. Friday night we have kiddush, which has to come first. So therefore, we cover up the bread so that we can say that bracha first. There are those, and say when you have a kiddush and you have mezonot, we do the same thing. We cover up the mezonot before they say again. Okay, so those are the different brachot. What we're going to discuss specifically is regarding the 2 brachot which are very closely related, which is brei praetz and brei pri hadama. The question is, when do you say brei praetz and when do you say brei pri hadama? So with most foods, so you'll say to me, okay, brei praetz means for a fruit, and brei pri hadama is for a vegetable. Brei praetz means that which grows, the fruit which grows from the tree. Brei pri hadama is the fruit which grows from the ground. Right? For most things, it's quite self-explanatory whether it grows from the tree or from the ground. There are a number of cases, a number of fruits and vegetables where it's not so clear-cut, and we'll see different machlokot and different sveikot in terms of how we pass it over there. Also, questions start to come up when you have a fruit which is crushed or pureed and then it loses its original form, right? What happens over there? Does the bracha change or not. So that's what we're discussing. So if you open up the books, page 171, we have the sugya begins with the Mishnah Masechet Brachot, the sixth parak. So this is the Mishnah which really delineates to us the different brachot that we say, the different categories of brachot on different foods. All these brachot, of course, are midrabanan. Still important. You still have to keep them. But as we discussed previously, how only Birkat Hamazon, which is benching, which is after bread meal, that is a bracha which is doraita. All the other brachot we have were instituted by our sages. So there's the Mishnah in source number 1. Again, we're on page 171. What bracha do we recite over fruits? When it comes to fruit of the tree, we would say borei pri ha'etz, right? Who has created the fruit of the tree. Chutz min hayayin, the exception of wine. Right? Wine and grape juice has its own special bracha, which is borei pri hagefen. Interestingly, because wine has got its significance, as we know from Kiddush, from Havdalah, from many important life events, we use a cup of wine. Interesting that grapes themselves, we still say borei pri ha'etz over the actual grapes, but over the wine, that has got its own bracha, which was instituted. Right? And over what we would call vegetables, right? So fruit of the earth, but we would say borei pri ha'adam. Chutz min hapat, even though bread comes from the ground, that has its own separate bracha, as we know. Shalapat omer hamotzi lechem min haaretz. And then the Mishnah continues, right, something which does not grow in the ground, meat, cheese, fish, etc., that has the bracha of shakol. And then the Mishnah concludes with a machloket between Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda regarding 3 categories: chometz, v'lanuvlot, v'laguvan. So these are all things, all types of foods which are in some way or other not sort of the normal thing. Now maybe spoiled a little bit. Vinegar over here refers to wine that fermented and spoiled. Novlot talks about dates that are not ripe. Govai is a type of locust. So over those says the Mishnah, you would say shakol. Rabbi Yehuda Omer kol shumin klala ein vachin alav. Rabbi Yehuda says anything which is a curse, one would not say a bracha over it at all. So that seems to be the machloket between the two of them. Just additionally, something which a person would not eat under normative conditions. We don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda in this case, but something which a person would not ordinarily eat and is shoved down one's throat, even though it's not something that you can eat or something that is not edible in any way. There you would not say a bracha. You would not say a bracha either. Not directly our topic. It may come up later when we talk about shakol. But for example, if a person takes medicine, what is the halakha? Does a person have to say a bracha upon taking a medicine? So if you have, something which has a sweet taste, take a lozenge or something which has a taste, and you get the benefit from that, then you would say a shakol before. If you swallow a pill, you swallow a tablet which has no taste, you're not eating it, you're just swallowing it, there would be no bracha rishonah, no bracha achrona, which one would say with that. What if you are drinking, as most people do, you're drinking some sort of liquid to go along with the tablet? So if you're drinking any liquid other than water, you would say a bracha. If you're drinking water only for the purposes of swallowing the tablet, so then no bracha would be required. Person's thirsty as well and wants to drink, so then you would say then you would say the bracha. But water is an exception. Water, if it's drank not for any nutritional value, but just in order to help swallow the pill, etc., there would be no bracha. Okay, so going on now. Back to our Mishnah began with borei pri ha'etz and borei pri ha'adama. Just say, we've mentioned it before, but what if a person gets it wrong? What if a person says the wrong bracha that they were meant to say before we learn about what the right bracha is, just to understand? So which one? Obviously, borei pri ha'adama is a more inclusive bracha than borei pri ha'etz. Also, that's from the order. We said at the beginning of the shir, the order of brachot. You have 2 fruits in front of you, but you have one which is borei pri ha'etz and one which is borei pri ha'adama. You would first say the bracha of borei pri ha'etz, that is more specific, and then you would say the bracha of borei pri ha'adama. Since you can say that borei pri ha'adama, that which grows from the ground, essentially a tree grows from the ground, so the fruits that grow from the tree ultimately do grow from the ground. So if I have, let's make it easy, let's say an apple, the bracha is borei pri ha'etz, that is clearly an apple tree, is considered a tree, halachically there's no question there. So if one said, for whatever reason, made a mistake, and said borei pri ha'adama before eating their apple, that is okay. They have said the bracha, they have not, that is correct, what they've said, and the bracha would apply. If it's the other way around, let's say a person has a cucumber, and then one said brei pri ha'etz, so it's true that a tree grows from the ground, not everything that comes from the ground is a tree, as we're about to learn, and therefore that would not count, and one would have to go back and say a new bracha. Okay, so in cases of doubt, we'll see many times, where you're not sure if the bracha should be brei pri ha'etz or brei pri adama. If you said brei pri adama, that is sufficient. But if it's meant to be brei pri ha'etz, that's what we should say. In the same way, the poskim say, person has some food and is really not sure what the bracha is. And so if you said shakol, then that's okay. You know, at one point my son learned this halakha and he was just saying shakol on everything. He said that's not quite the way it's meant to work. But anyway, so brei pri ha'etz. So fruits of the tree, we say brei pri ha'etz. The obvious question here is, what is a tree? How do we define it? How do we define it halachically? Obviously, it will be related in some way to the botanic definition, but may not be exclusive. So if you look on page 172, we have a sugya in the Gemara and Brachot, source number 2. We're on Daf Mem Amud Aleph at the end to Mem Amud Bet, and the Gemara says the following, source number 2. So when do we say this bracha of brei pri ha'etz? In other words, what constitutes the tree? Says the Gemara, when you take the fruit from the tree, okay, you can see here in the translation that word gevoza, however it's pronounced, is not translated. It's just put in italics. The reason for that is that we're going to have a big machloket rishonim in terms of how we understand what this is talking about. So this gevoza, something of the tree, where the gevoza remains, i.e., when you take the fruit off and this part of the tree remains there and continues producing fruit, that is considered a tree. However, in a case where, in a situation where you take the fruit and this part of the tree does not remain, i.e., the tree will need to be replanted or something new has to grow again in order to produce the tree, so then we would say, in other words, so there's a certain element, a certain part of the tree which needs to remain, and once the fruit has grown, it needs to stay there in order to grow the fruit again the following year and the following season. That is considered a tree. Anything where this part, disintegrates and it's going to need to be planted again or needs to grow again, that would be considered adama. The question obviously is, at this point, what is gevosa? What does this mean? And then we have 3 possibilities in the Rishonim what it can be referring to. These sugyot are, once upon a time, people were much more in tune with kind of what was going on in the tree, in the fields and in the farms. So we had a more agricultural society. Now, nowadays, I remember a couple of years ago, somebody told me they were in a school, in a classroom, so they were learning brachot, and they said to the kids, what bracha is this fruit and what bracha is that fruit? They said, what's the bracha on a peach? So the kid said, I don't know. So they said, well, where does it come from? It comes from a tree. So you say, brei. I said, no, it doesn't come from a tree. It comes from a box. So this is obviously where did the box come from? But this is how people think today. We see the fruits and we see the vegetables, we see them in the shops or in the shuk or in the shiny packets, whatever it is. But we have to understand where do they actually come from and how do we define the trees? How do we learn what the bracha is? Okay. So again, the Gemara said the definition of the tree is going to depend on whether a certain part of the tree plant, this gevoza, whether it remains intact or not once the fruit has been picked. So what is it? What are we talking about? So the first opinion is Rashi. Rashi in source number 3 at the bottom of the page 172. Rashi says, Gevoza ha'anach tela'etz. This is the branch of the tree. So the tree has a trunk. Off the trunk you have the branches, the fruits of the branches. So Rashi seems to understand that if the branch is only when the branch itself remains intact and is going to produce more fruit, then that would be brei pri ha'etz. But if the branch itself is going to wither away and fall off, then that would not be considered a tree. Okay, that's the most, stringent opinion. The Shulchan Aruch Harav here in source number 4 elaborates a little bit on this opinion of Rashi. He says, Yesh omrim she'afilu ha'ikar nish'al kayam kol ha'cholev, that even if the main part, the trunk of the tree, remains intact through the entire winter, but it's only its branches which fall off throughout the winter, and then they go and they grow again, they come back and blossom the following summer. Umotziin alin, and then they produce leaves or perot and fruit. And perotav chashuvim levarech alehem b'lei p'le'etz. This would not be, according to this opinion, which is probably not going to be the normative halacha, but according to this opinion, even then, that would not be considered borei pri'etz. Opinion number one is that Gevoza here in the Gemara refers to the branches of the tree. Opinion number two, and this is brought in the Torah. The Torah over here is discussing the bracha on berries. You can see there is a long controversy going on, stretching for a number of centuries in terms of what bracha should be said on berries. But the Torah over here quotes an opinion of the Geonim. The main machloket we're going to have over here between Brei Pri'etz and Brei Pri'adama is going to be between the Geonim and the Rosh. So opinion number one is that of the Geonim. It's brought here in the Tur who is the son of the Rosh, and he writes the following. Source number 5. He says, V'arav Yosef katav, sheyesh levarech alein b'rei pri adama. He says, regarding berries, one should say b'rei pri adama. Lefi shematzav b'tshuvat haGeonim, kol ilan she'avash b'situa v'kalu gozei v'tarpei legamre, v'had arpel imishoshav v'machin alav b'rei pri adama. Let's look at the translation. He says he found here in this response of the Geonim that regarding any tree which dries up in the winter and its trunk is destroyed and decimated, and then later on it's going to flower from its roots, then we would say the bracha of Borei Pri Hadama. In other words, says the Torah in the name of the Geonim, it's not the branches that the Gemara was talking about, but when we say Gevoza, that is the part which, if this part of the tree remains intact, we say Borei Pri Ha'etz, and if this part of the tree does not remain intact, we say Borei Pri Adama. That is relating to the trunk. So therefore, any time where you have the trunk of the tree and that remains from year to year, that would be the definition where we would say Borei Pri Ha'etz. Any place where the trunk itself is not does not stay from one year to the next, that would be Borei Pri Hadama.
What's the definition of a trunk? That be single trunk?
Are you talking about in terms of the question was asked? What's the definition of a trunk? You're asking in terms of how big it is, or
no. I view a trunk. It's something that goes up and something like that. But like many bushes don't have one trunk.
Right. Okay. So that was the question. What is the difference between a tree and a bush? We're going to see. It's exactly part of the controversy here relating to berries, and it's going to go on. You'll see. I think we've even got some pictures in here. If you look on page, where was it? Page 177. Well, that's a mulberry tree. I think there was some other bushes, etc. You can see, but that's going to be once we've understood what Gevoza is. That's stage number one. There's going to be a second machloket, which is even if we say the trunk that's part of the tree remains intact, how do we define it as a tree in the first place? If it's very, very low and it's very close to the ground, is that a tree or is that a bush? If it's a bush, it would be Borei Pri Hadama, right? So we'll see. That relates to berries itself. We'll get into a little bit more specifics of that later. But that's the point, and that is what the Torah says here in the name of the Geonim. The Sefer Bekat Hashem in source number 6 says this may be dependent on the Girsa, the manuscript that we have of the words in the Gemara, because he says Nireh Shegavsu Bigma Mishtayel Ilana B'Makom Ma Shektuv Lefneinu Itele Gevoza. In other words, our version of the Gemara says Gevoza, which sounds like, as Rashi said, relates to the branches. But there may have been a text which does not have that word, but it rather says Mishtayer Ilana, which means the tree, which means the trunk. In any event, that is the position here of the Geonim, to say that depends on if the trunk remains intact, that will be Borei Pri Ha'etz. If the trunk does not remain intact, that would be Borei Pri Hadama. And now we get to the opinion of the Rosh. And the Rosh differs from this idea of the Geonim. For the Geonim, the Rosh came after Geonim, but he says the following. Source number 7. He says, "Bigmara kama kol davar she'oseh pelot mishana leshana nikra etz, aval kol davar shetzarich lezor'o b'chol shana nikra pri ha'aretz." In other words, what is the Rosh telling us? He says anything which produces fruit from year to year, the tree. Okay, so this plant, whatever it is, that has been planted is a multi-year. It's going to continue to produce fruits, even if the trunk withers away and it regrows, but it regrows the next year by itself. So long as the roots are there intact, you don't have to replant it. That is considered a tree, and that is considered Borei Pri Ha'etz. Otherwise, only if it's a single year species that needs to be replanted the following year, that it would be Borei Pri Hadama. So you can just see on page, and we'll see some of the nafkamina between the Rosh and the Gonim when it comes to things like papaya and things like bananas and things like that. You can see on the top of page 174, just to summarize what we've seen. We said number one, when Rashi said if the branches remain on the tree from 1 year to the next, then the bracha za'etz, but if they wither the branches, the bracha would be Adama. Opinion number two was the Geonim, who said the bracha za'etz only if the trunk remains from 1 year to the next, the trunk. But if the trunk dies, then the bracha would be Adama. And then the Rosh, who's the most far-reaching, essentially in extending the bracha of Borei Pri Ha'etz to more species, he says even if the branches and the trunk would die, so long as the roots remain and the plant grows anew, without being replanted, the bracha is ha'etz. The bracha is adama only if the plant needs to be replanted every year. Okay, so that is one sugya that we have in the Gemara there in brachot, which tells us the definition of a tree. As we've seen, three different opinions, but when it comes to halacha, it's really going to be the question whether we hold like the Geonim or like the Rosh, and we're probably going to hold like opinion number two. There are other places in Shas, and necessarily Bavli, in the Yerushalmi and the Tosefta, which are other Tanaic sources, which give us a slightly different definition, different classification of a tree. See source number 8, for example, which is this Tosefta, which says Akanim v'chagin v'veled v'tadin, all different types of plant species, which it says on min ilan, ve'einan kilayim bakel. Right, the definition of a tree is going to be important not just for the halachot of brachot, but for other agricultural laws, the laws of kilayim, of forbidden mixtures. So Zeh HaKlal says, Kol HaMatzi Alin Me'ikaro Halei Zeh Yelech, V'kol She'en Motzi Alin Me'ikaro Halei Zeh Ilan. So here's a different categorization, a different rule. It says anything which has Kol HaMatzi Alin Alav Me'ikaro, where the leaves are produced directly from the base, from the trunk, so to speak, that is considered a vegetable. That is not a tree. I guess you wouldn't call it a trunk. But where you have a trunk and only then you have branches, only then you have the leaves, that is going to be considered a tree. So that seems to be a more sort of botanical classification of that. The Talmud Yerushalmi as well, in source number 9, says something similar. It says, Tani Rabbi Kenigsberg Papa, et she'oleh migiz'o min ilan, mishoshav min yared. Okay, so a little bit different, it's slightly different nuance, but it says anything which comes out from the stem, a little bit confusing here, because the word gezer, right, does not really referring to the trunk. It seems to be saying a similar idea to the Tosefta. It doesn't come directly. If it comes directly from the roots, it's going to be a vegetable. But if you have a stem first, and then that's going to be the tree. But we can see that really the poskim take less into consideration these definitions, more the previous definitions that we saw before from the Gemara Brachot in terms of when it comes to Avot Brachot. But the Tur says, the source number 10, he says, Siman Leida, Eze Pri Eitz or Pri Adama, at the top of page 175 in the Tur. He says, how do you know what is considered fruits of the tree or produce of the earth? Kol ilan shoseh perot mishana leshana nikra Pri Eitz. אבל כל דבר שאין שורשיו נשארים בארצו, צריכים לעשות בכל שנה, נקרא פרי אדמה. So that is the opinion of, that sounds like the opinion of the Rosh. It's his father, right? He says any time where the roots are going to continue sprouting each year, and that is going to be pri ha'etz, whereas where you need to replant it, that would be pri adama. תלקח אמר רב יצחק, תותים הגדלים בסנה וכיוצא בהם מברכין עליהם בלי פרי העץ. Therefore, he says tut, which nowadays, usually we talk about tut, we refer to strawberries, but not necessarily. The word tut just means berries. He says he would say that berries are borei pri ha'etz. As we said, we'll get to berries soon, a long ongoing controversy. But Shemini Lanham, he says this is a type of tree. And that, as we've seen, is the opinion of the Rosh. But as we've seen, it does not take into account the definition which is brought out to Tosefta of the Yerushalmi. So Rav Shavai, source number 11, says it's very logical that we have different types of laws relating to trees. There can be different definitions, right? The biological definition of a tree is not necessarily what interests us here when it comes to the laws of brachot. And why is that? Source number 11, he says, Lechoran Yiram Izeh. En priva yerek legabe brachot, kegeder priva yerek legabe kila. When it comes to what bracha you say before you eat it, or where you're allowed to plant it. Those are two different sets of halachot, and therefore they have two different sets of definitions. What is a tree and what is not? They have different rules, different definitions. And he says now in the second paragraph, there is a simple reason to distinguish between them. When we're talking about the bracha, what interests us? What interests us is not the tree itself. What interests us is the fruit that we're about to eat. Is this considered a fruit that comes from the ground or comes from a tree? How do I look at this object? But when it comes to kilayim, what we can plant, we're looking at the plant itself, at the tree, and therefore there is room to differ between them. Okay, so how do we paskin, and what do we say at the end of the day? And some of the complicated and unusual cases. So over the page 176, we see the Shulchan Aruch and later the Mishnah Berurah as well. We're going to see that they paskin not like the Rosh and the Tzurba, but rather like the Geonim. Again, remind you, the Geonim said the trunk, so long as the trunk remains intact, only that is considered a tree. The Rosh said the trunk does not need to remain intact, but the roots remain intact and a new plant will sprout the following year without having to be replanted. But the Shulchan Aruch seems to say like the Geonim. First opinion says, Alatotim Magdelim Basneh, regarding berries and the like which grow in a bush, one says the bracha of Borei Pri Ha'adama. As we just saw, the Rosh would have said they're Borei Pri Ha'etz, but the Shulchan Aruch says no, these are Borei Pri Ha'adama. Says the Rama, he adds in, the lo mikra etz, ela shemotzi alav me'etzo, avama shemotzi alav mishorashav lo mikra etz. So he says over here, again, the Rama seems to mix the two definitions, but he says it's not called a tree, only that where the leaves come out of its from the wood, from the branches. Where there is no trunk, that is not considered a tree, and therefore, in this case, this is the definition we saw before, that since the trunk is completely withers away in the winter, and then it starts to grow again from its roots, therefore we say, Borei Pri Ha'adama. The Shulchan Aruch continues regarding bananas as well, mauzish. Okay, I'm not sure what language that is, but that's what they call bananas. We just call them bananas. Borei Pri Ha'adama. That would be Borei Pri Ha'adama as well, for a similar reason. In that the tree would not last, the trunk of the tree would not last from one year to the other. So says the Mishnah Berurah, just explaining on what we've said, yeah. Source number 13. It says, right, mulberries. When it's yesh minay mulber, shekdelim be'ilan, umavachin alav borei pri ha'etz, v'chein malin shelanu gam ken yado shekdelim be'ilan, v'kem mishana l'shana, v'achim alav borei pri. So it's a little bit confusing because that he seems to be talking about a different type of variety that grows on a tree. Yeah, we said the berries the Shulchan Aruch is talking about, we say Borei Pri Ha'adama. Says the Mishnah Berurah, there is a different type of species which grows on a tree, but this is not considered a tree. Right, bet he says Shemotzi alav me'etzo. This maybe relates to Paul's question from earlier. He says, "As yesh al pilyo shem pli etz, afim ha'etzu agivor dak." Meaning, even if the tree is a thin stalk, but the fruit itself doesn't emerge directly from the roots, there is a thin stalk which is can be considered the tree. Fitting in with the other definitions we've said, that would still be considered a tree. And then regarding bananas, is the same reason as for fruits, as for berries. Okay, so the question now is, as we mentioned before, if a person said the wrong bracha, we have a suffix. As we know, if we said Borei Pri Ha'adama on something that we were meant to say Borei Pri Ha'etz, because Borei Pri Ha'adama is a more general bracha, at least for the ever, that would be okay, and you've satisfied your obligation to say the bracha. What about here? Yeah, we have a different question. Let's take the case of bananas. Right? We've just seen that the bracha we say on bananas is Borei Pri Ha'adama. And if there's something you're required to say Borei Pri Ha'adama, and you said Borei Pri Ha'etz, that is incorrect, and therefore you would have to say new bracha. However, here it's a little bit more complicated. Why? Because we have a machloket between the Rosh and the Geonim. What is the correct bracha on banana in the first place? There is an opinion It's the Rosh, it's a significant opinion, who says that the bananas themselves should be break priya eitz. Therefore, what's the issue? The issue is if I say the wrong bracha, I've said something which is not relevant for the food in question, I've said something which is incorrect, which is untrue, and therefore it doesn't count. But here, could you say that it's untrue? Because according to the Rosh, that's the bracha. So if a person accidentally said the bracha of break priya eitz on a banana, have they said a bracha? So according to Rav Ovadia, we don't have it here inside, but if you look up in Chazon Ovadia, brachot, page 147, after the shir, you can all go home and look it up. But he says there that ha'etz would be acceptable for bananas. On the other hand, Rav Ben Zion Abba Shaul, and I think this is more than the more common side, in response to Olet Zion, says no. Source number 14. He says, even though this bracha is the subject of a debate, of a machloket rishonim, וכמו שכתב בבית יוסף שם, מכל מקום, nonetheless, כיוון שנהגו לברך בורא פרי אדמה, once we've accepted the halacha now that the bracha is בורא פרי אדמה, in bold, יש לומר שנהגו כן בתורת ודאי. Now that is the bracha, we no longer consider it a safek, we no longer consider it a doubt, consider that is the appropriate bracha. And if you were living in the times of the Rosh, that would have been different, but we're not. And therefore, לכן לא אסרו משום עולה, כמו שנבהר באורך במבוא הספר, בנפקים בכוחו של מנהג. Right, this relates to another area of halacha, which is the dinim of orla. Orla is the fruit of a tree. You cannot, not only can you not eat from it, you cannot get any benefit from it. Orla is one of the strictest prohibitions we have when it comes to prohibitions of forbidden food. For the first 3 years, you cannot derive any benefit from the fruit of a tree. If it's considered a tree, you're going to have the din of orla. If it's considered a vegetable, then or break pri adama, so then you would not have the din of orla. So we can't have it both ways. So therefore, he says, mishum kach, mishta'al b'lech b'lei pla'etz al pri banana. So bottom line, and I think this is the accepted halacha, that if a person made a mistake and said Borei Pri Ha'etz on a banana, they need to go back and say Borei Pri Ha'adama, as if you have not said a bracha at all. Okay, let's see some of the other unusual cases where we have machlokot. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, for most fruits and vegetables, it's pretty clear cut. What's considered a tree and what's considered from the ground, but some, like the case of banana, is not. So on page 179, we see another case which comes up is a pineapple. Pineapple, there is a machloket about as well, because when you have a pineapple plant, you can see over here it says the fruit grows from the trunk and not the roots, but the trunk withers away after a year. So the Sefer V'zot HaBracha says over here, it says ananas eino nechshav pri ha'etz me'achar sheshana achrei netiat ha'etz. Meaning, since within a year after it's been planted, the plant needs to be cut down and needs to start again. Therefore, that is not considered a tree. That is considered an adama. Quoting the Mishnah Berurah that if one would say Borei Pri Ha'etz on that, again, that one would not have fulfilled the obligation. Similarly to the bananas, so there are those who say you have, but as we said, similar to bananas, that would not count. Now, what about berries? Berries, we saw the Shulchan Aruch, and there was a long discussion over here. You see on page 180. We said like this: although the bush is going to remain intact throughout the year, but it's not clear whether the bush over here is considered as a tree or not. You can see the picture at the bottom of page 180, the blueberry bush, right? Do we consider that a trunk or not? Or how do we view the status of these berries? So Mishnah Berurah in source number 16, he says, Pelot, shegdelin al inanot ktanot, af shegovan pachot v'gimel tfachim. Right? You have a very, very small tree, less than 3 tfachim below the ground. Why 3 tfachim? 3 tfachim is the minimum measurement. We find this in many different areas of halacha. But when it comes to levud, you have this by Eruvin, you have this by the laws of a sukkah, right? Where you have less than 3 tfachim of open space, we consider as if that is not open space. We consider that it is all closed up. So you have the walls of a sukkah, for example, which start more than 3 tfachim above the ground. That's no good, because the walls need to start from the ground. If it's less than 3 tfachim, then that's considered as if it's joined onto the ground. Same thing if you have gaps in the walls or gaps in the schach above, and you have this by constructing eruvim, etc. So we consider 3 tfachim as closed. So sometimes Also in Hilchot Shabbat. And other things we'll consider 3 tvachim that is below less than 3 tvachim. It's as if it's still on the ground. So here he says, even if you have these small trees, even though they are less than 3 tvachim, more yagdish are berries apparently. Nonetheless, right, we've seen already the definitions. We've seen that the fruit grows not directly from the trunk, not directly from the stem. You have that stem or that trunk; it's there. It lasts from year to year. That would be borei pre'etz. However, he says, the more common practice is in this case that we don't consider that an etz, we consider that borei pre'adama. What is the reason? We don't really consider it as fruit. We don't consider it so much as a tree. So over here, the Moshe goes into a little bit more detail. Source number 17. He says, again, of what's literally blackberries, but really blueberries. Right? So the Mishnah Berurah said, first we have an opinion that says this is considered fruit. This is considered borei pri'etz. But he said, nonetheless, the common practice is to say borei pri ha'adam. Right? He's talking about a certain species whereby, again, the bush is very low, below 3 tvachim. That's what we're dealing with. That is talking about what the certain bush in Europe. Again, you can see from these discussions, you need to know really what we're talking about and what the plant is and how it looks and what its characteristics are. But there where it was very low, less than 3 tvachim, so that's where we said borei pri'adama. But if it's a larger bush, that's considered a tree. According to everybody, you'd say borei pri'etz. He says, meaning when he says here b'mdinotenu, it's confusing. It's an outlet, meaning in their place of what the Mishnah Berurah was talking about in Europe. He says, Mishnah Berurah katav she'olam noagin avarech borei pri'adama v'chein ita b'chei adam. Although there was the practice to say borei pri'adama, he says, lo haya minhag ze b'chol ha'olam. Not everybody agreed, not everywhere. There were places where the minhag was to say borei pri ha'etz. Lachen b'makom in both. Lachen b'makom shelo yadu ha'minhag, where the custom is not known. Yesh levarech borei pri ha'etz. V'chen shesh safek im delim al ilanot putim migim tvachim u'gvoin yesh levarech b'kom makom borei pri ha'etz. So interestingly, he paskins that if there is a machloket at the end of the day, it would seem to be that there should be borei pri ha'etz, that this is a tree, and therefore that is the bracha that you would say. This is not like the previous case we saw, where it was a machloket regarding the definition, going back to the Geonim and the Rosh, and we paskin regarding that definition, we paskin like the Geonim against the Rosh, and therefore that is what we say. Yeah, it fits into the definitions of the Gemara. However, there is a new question when you look at it. How do you describe it? Do you describe it as a tree? Do you describe it as a bush? Since it fits the definition of a tree, therefore he says it could be borei pri'etz, unless there was a practice, there was a minhag, established custom to say borei pri'adama. Again, it's not, if you're going to say borei pri'adama, you would have maybe where the practice came from was because of a certain doubt. If you say borei pri'adama, you'd certainly be Yosef. It's meant to be borei pri'etz, and that is no problem. So source number 18, Laws of Brachot by Rav Forst, which is a contemporary English sefer. He says raspberries and blackberries, common today, grow in a bush which lasts from year to year and is taller than 11 inches. That's more than 3 tvachim, and therefore their bracha is certainly ha'etz. Okay, the next one more interesting discussion which comes up is regarding papaya. If you look on page 182, so it tells us here that this is a tree which seems to fit the criteria of a tree, both what we saw in the Gemara and in the Tosefta, right? It fits everything. On the one hand, the plant remains intact from year to year, or at least 2 or 3 years, maybe even longer than that. And number 2 is that the leaves emerge from the trunk and not from the roots. However, we're on page 182 in the middle. However, the poskim point to another botanical feature which distinguishes tree fruit from ground fruit, which might be relevant. And that is, this is brought in the response of the Radbaz. So this is a new definition which we have. which we don't find in other places, but says the Rambaz number 20. Shaliti le'Eretz Yisrael, ראיתי כולם נהגו בו היטב, משמע דפשיטא לו דהווה ודאי ילד. Again, we're dealing with the papaya plant. If it's going to, the fruit is produced, we're talking about in the first year of its growth. If it's considered to be a tree, that is going to be a problem to benefit from it in the first year or in the first 3 years, as we've already mentioned. So he says, I saw that everybody was, the practice was to be lenient, and that must mean that they relate to it as a vegetable, not as a tree. Top of page 183, it says, even if it's a doubt, by Orla, we have as I mentioned, very, very stringent, we have a din regarding Sveik Orla. Yeah, there's a difference between in Eretz Yisrael or in Chutz La'aretz, but in Eretz Yisrael, Sveik Orla, we consider stringently, we judge it as Orla. And therefore, if you're not sure if it's a tree or not, therefore it's a Sveik Orla, and therefore you would be forbidden to benefit from it. So, but here he says the common practice was that everybody was lenient, and therefore, so what is the reason why it would not be forbidden, and that it's not considered like a tree? He says here in bold, he says there is no kind of tree. This is the chidush of the Radbaz. There's no kind of tree which produces a fruit within the first year after it's grown. So therefore it is a vegetable. So he's talking about the chatzilim. He's talking about eggplants. Eggplants are aubergine, depending on whether you're from America or England. But that is his definition, therefore, of a vegetable. So there are other achronim who give other reasons. Look in footnote number 3. It says that there are other reasons to consider papaya a vegetable because the stem is hollow, unlike a tree trunk. Again, we go back to that question of how do we define a trunk or not. But the Yalkut Yosef in source number 21, based on this Radbaz, says that if he said that regarding the eggplant, we would say the same regarding the papaya. It's papaya it's considered like a vegetable. So therefore you would say borei pri adama for that. Now there are poskim who say that you would say borei pri adama. According to that, you would say that these are not considered fruits; they are considered vegetables, so we don't have to be concerned regarding orla. There are poskim who say that we would still say borei pri adama, but because there's a certain safek, there's doubt, and we do need to be stringent regarding orla, and that you can see here in source number 22. It says avshesh poskim asovrim shapapaya dino kapli lagabe orla mikom makom. There are those who are stringent regarding orla. Nonetheless, they would say regarding the bracha yesh avach misafek borei pri adama, since there is uncertainty. So here we're being stringent, sort of in both directions. And then he says the name of Rav Osma in Shem Talevi. And finally, on source number 23, we have a similar discussion regarding passiflora, also known as passion fruit. You can see in number 23. Okay, so those are the definitions that we've seen. Essentially, 3 different levels of definition of what is a tree and what is not. The main sugya from the Gemara regarding something which part of the tree withers away from year to year, and when that is not, whether that remains intact, whether that would be considered a tree or not. According to Rashi, which doesn't really appear later on in the Halakha, he said it's relating to the branches. But we saw the opinion of the Geonim was that if the trunk remains intact, that would be considered a tree. The Rosh said even if the trunk is not intact, but the roots remain intact, does not need to be replanted, that would still be considered a tree, and therefore the Rosh would say that bananas are borei pri ha'etz. Nonetheless, we said the Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Geonim in terms of that. Beyond that, even something which has satisfied those criteria, we saw that there is a controversy regarding the Yerushalmi, and the Tosefta gives a different definition of a tree in terms of the makeup of the tree, the stem, whether there's a trunk, whether the fruits are from where they emerge, whether there's a stalk or a trunk or something of the like from which the fruits to emerge first. And then we saw that even regarding berries, a bit of a controversy, even where it does satisfy the criteria, if it's a very low bush, would that, according to some, that is still considered a tree, and according to some, that is not.
So what about things growing in water?
Okay. So the question was, what about things growing in water, hydroponics? So this is a fascinating question which comes up, and there are those who say think it's one name of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, I don't remember, but I think there definitely are those who say that when you have plants which are not actually planted in the ground and are planted in water, that the bracha for that would be shehakol, right? Because to say brei pri hadama, it's not growing from the ground. There are others, I think it's Rav Ozna, who say that, and other poskim who say no, that once the bracha was established, once still the type of fruit or the type of vegetable, meaning although this particular tomato or whatever it is, right, didn't grow from the ground, but you're saying it over the whole species, and therefore it would be okay. Bottom line is, if you don't know, and most of the time you don't know, right, whether this came specifically from hydroponics water grown or not, so then the poskim say you say brei pri hadama, and that would be okay. If you know, it comes, sealed and stamped. Now this is a hydroponically grown vegetable. It never saw the ground in its life. It came from water. So that is a machlokes poskim. But either way, there would be those who would. I think in that case, b'diavad, even the poskim would say that it would say shakol, would say that b'diavad it would still be okay.
The same thing will apply to laboratory grown fruits and vegetables. Laboratory exists.
What do you mean?
Just like with a piece of meat that's grown from a cell, growing an apple from the apple cell.
Okay, I'm not sure if that's I'm not sure whether I don't know if that exists in that way, but that would be another complicated case. I think the person would have to discuss that separately. Okay. Yeah.
You don't say Shechianu over passion fruit.
Shit. What?
Passion fruits are dominant.
We can say Shechianu. Shechianu is not dependent on whether it's brei bread or brei bread or not.
I thought so.
Shechianu is dependent on that it's a new that it's a new seasonal fruit.
Where does something bracha come in all of this?
What do you mean?
In other words, from charcoal, if I make muzonos, if I make a this, if I make a that,
Yeah.
it's something on the fruit, on the vegetable, and I make the wrong bracha.
Right.
So why can I not be used with the bracha that I made? The charcoal for the eggs.
Oh, so
Would you repeat the question?
I'll repeat the question. Sure. I'm just trying to make sure I understand the question. But the question was also regarding safek bracha, right? So we have a question of a doubt. So your question is, if we're not sure what the bracha is,
So whether it's a charcoal for muzonos or eggs for zona, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Why do we make the bracha again?
why do we make the bracha
Why do we
again?
make the proper bracha instead of relying upon the shakol that I made for the something bracha?
The question was, why do we have to say the proper bracha instead of saying just the shakol, and then you can be yotzi? So again, Chazal instituted different brachot. There's an understanding that there's a more specific bracha for different types of foods.
You should do it.
Look at Chila, you should do it for sure. Okay.
If I made a mistake, what I'm getting from you is that you have to say the bracha again.
Okay. May I understand? Tell me if I don't understand. Your question is, I have a number of foods in front of me, and I'm saying a number of different brachot. So I've said the bracha of shakol, and now I take my banana and I pick it up and I say borei pri eitz. I say, oops, I said the wrong bracha, but I already said the shakol. Okay. So first of all, if you're saying your brachot in the right order, so then that won't happen, right? Because shakol is the one you're going to be saying.
I didn't want to eat it. When I made the shakol, I didn't want to eat it.
So you didn't want to eat it. Okay, so then everything goes by intention, right? Everything goes by kavanah when I say a bracha. When I have a number of, we may get to this in later shirim, I'm not sure. But if I have a number of different foods in front of me, which have different, let's say, I say a shakol on a food that I have in front of me now, and later on, somebody brings me another food, right, which is also shakol. Okay, do I have to say shakol again, or do I have to not in the first? So the answer is, it depends what you had in mind when you said the first shakol. If you had in mind that this is going to apply for whatever food that you may eat later on, so then you won't need to say a new bracha. If you had in mind that I'm saying shakol specifically on this food which I'm holding and not on anything else, then I'll have to say a new bracha. Where do things become difficult? Most people don't have that level of kavanah when they say the bracha. You pick up the food, you say the bracha, you don't think about it. If I was to come and ask you, say, what was your intention? You say, I don't know, I just say the bracha, right? So therefore, Chazal gave us a number of rules in terms of what we assume that the person's stam kavanah was. So stam kavanah would be that if it's part of a meal, I'd say the bracha would be whatever's going to be part of that meal. Stam kavanah would be if I'm eating a meal in somebody else's home. Chazal say that your opinion is whatever the host is going to serve you would be included. So even if I don't know that there's another course coming, but that's part of it. Fine. In this case, now the question is like this. So I said a shakul, right? And now they bring me fruit for dessert. And on the fruit, I say the wrong bracha, right? I say brei pri adama instead of brei pri etz or whatever. Can I go back? Can I rely on the shakul that I've already said? Because that is a more inclusive bracha. If we say that your intent is to say the proper bracha for each food, and therefore when I say shakol, my intent is to be poter, to exempt the foods which are shakol, and not to exempt the foods which are brei pri adama, because I want to say the bracha, that's going to be that's what I'm going to have a problem. If, on the other hand, when I say the bracha, let's say a fruit's coming, let's say papaya is coming, and I know there's a big machloket in the poskim whether I say brei pri et and brei pri adama and papaya, and therefore when I say brei pri adama or I say shakol, I have in mind that I want it to be to exempt the papaya as well. That's okay. That would work. But so long as when it falls within the usual klalim, then that would be fine. But again, the order of brachot that we said, we're going back to the beginning of the ship. We said mimaga esh. Right? Chazal established that you have to say the brachot, the more specific bracha first, and the less specific bracha afterwards. So if I'm in the ordinary situation, I would say the brei pri etz, but I've not yet said brei pri adama or shakol. Therefore, I can't rely on the more inclusive bracha because I haven't said it. But if I was to say that bracha first, or I was to skip the brei pri etz because I'm not sure what it is and I want to make sure that it's included, then that would be okay. Question?
So it's the best thing to always have in mind when you say shakol and includes everything. In case I remember, then I would say.
If there's something that's what the Muslims say, if there's something that I'm not sure about, and I don't know what the bracha is, then I should have in mind. Yeah. Again, if we're dealing with the species of fruits, we don't need to get to the shakol because the brei pri adama will include. Now the question becomes, and where it's going to be very relevant as well. We don't have time to go into it now, but we'll discuss next week. Be'ezrat Hashem, we talk about crushed and pureed produce, all sorts of things. We can talk about mashed potatoes, about falafel, about cereals, about avocado, eggplant, whatever it is, where you have a fruit or vegetable which has been mashed, which has been crushed up, which is now no longer has its original form. If it is unrecognizable from what it was, or alternatively, you have a fruit or vegetable which is normally eaten raw and is eaten cooked, or is normally eaten cooked and is eaten raw in the unusual way, would it still have its original bracha, or does that change to shakol? Okay, that we will discuss next week. Thank
you very much.
Oh, I can start calling them Kenny before I never stop.
If they are 100 bucks a day, and more areas.
I started.